A former U.S. intelligence officer has given his analysis of the credibility of UFO whistleblower David Grusch. It's rather interesting to hear what he has to say, since he's had a very long career from within the intelligence community. Yesterday evening, UFO researcher David Grusch sent me a direct message on Twitter saying, "Here's a well-written post from a claimed former member of the U.S. intelligence community, which I found on a private UFO group. I've asked his permission to share it, and he's agreed, but wants to remain anonymous." I'm going to read his very well-written and enlightening analysis on David Grusch. I won't show the copy as I read, but I will enunciate his words exceedingly clearly. Pay close attention. Afterward, we'll discuss segments of it. I'm a former member of the U.S. intelligence community. Here's why I think aliens are real. Let's talk about David Grusch. He's the guy who testified before Congress last year. Once upon a time, David Grusch was a GS-15, colonel equivalent, at the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO. The NRO is a DoD agency. They basically manage all the U.S.'s satellites. Grusch was the intel chief in the NRO's operations center. That means he was the top intelligence person in the operations center. The operations center is where they monitor what's actually happening in space with the satellites. In addition, he was also the agency's lead for Special Access Programs, SAP. You might hear of SAPs as being above top secret. That's kind of true, kind of not. Point is, you have to have the right clearance and the need to know to get access to any classified information. As NRO's lead for SAPs, he was read into every single SAP that NRO was connected to. NRO is DoD's main space-based intelligence agency. He knew everything it was possible to know at NRO. He also coordinated NRO's contribution to the president's daily brief. This means when it comes to intelligence coming from NRO, Grusch knew everything the president knew. He was also NRO's representative to DoD's UAP task force for 2 years. If anyone in DoD had access to classified government programs about UAPs and aliens, it was this dude. He said a lot of things to Congress. He said that there's crashed spacecraft. He said that there's non-human biologics associated with those crashed craft. To me, as a former member of the intelligence community working for DoD, what that guy said made absolute perfect sense to me. One of the questions that has always kind of stumped me was, why is information about aliens classified? Why would the government cover it up? Is it because of the War of the Worlds factor? Is the government just afraid of people freaking out and panicking? Would it represent a breakdown in order? Maybe it's the power of the Vatican, the church behind it. Maybe Christians and Catholics in the government are simply preventing word getting out because it would seem to undermine religion. Grusch provides a much better, much more powerful answer. According to him, there's a competition that's been going on since the 1930s. Countries have been competing to be the first to identify and recover crashed craft of all kinds. To me, this makes perfect sense. It literally answers all the questions. The military doesn't want other countries to know just exactly how powerful they are. If other countries understand your military capabilities, they can take measures to protect themselves. Think of satellites. Once other countries knew that the U.S. could take pictures of their country from space, they had to take steps to conceal their activities from a bird's eye view. One example of this is camouflage netting. You can spread this netting over a tank, for example, and from above, it looks more like a clump of bushes. Crashed UFOs, however, represent a massive win for the military. These craft contain technology that could be advanced by hundreds, if not thousands of years. If you can reverse engineer that technology, you could potentially render every other military on Earth powerless. The possibilities are mind-boggling. Imagine what you could do if you could make yourself invisible, or if you could travel through time or remote viewing. Imagine what you could do if you could convince an alien civilization to be your ally, like an intergalactic NATO, where if you were attacked, you could call upon your alien ally to fight for you and protect you. So what a given country knows about aliens, down craft, non-human biologics, etc., it makes perfect sense to call that a matter of national security and that it should be classified at the highest levels. It also makes sense that the intelligence community and DoD would keep this information from the president and from Congress. I could easily see people deciding that it's too dangerous to entrust to civilian politicians who might make it public in order to get elected. Think of it. If you're the president in your first term and the election is coming up in a couple of months and it's clear you're about to lose to your opponent, you might be tempted to disclose that aliens are real, to cause people to band together to face this new threat. And they need you and your experience to help them navigate this. Plus, you would be the one who finally did the right thing and ended so many years of deception. And well, you'd get reelected for sure. Or at least that might be the idea that occurs to you. And of course, all that technology represents tons of money, power, influence, etc. So thanks to David Grusch's testimony, we know a lot of things, and for me, it makes perfect sense now why UFOs have been classified for all these years. Perfect sense. To me, Grusch has as much credibility in this area as it's possible to have. But don't take my word for it. When Grusch brought his concerns about the government cover-up to the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, IGIC, they didn't laugh him out of their office. Grusch was able to show the IGIC everything. Everything. All the true classified evidence for crashed craft, alien bodies, everything. No matter what SAP this information belonged to, the IGIC is cleared to access it. Upon examining all that evidence, and there was mountains of it, the IGIC said that Grusch's claims were credible and urgent. He did not say that Grusch was correct. In legal terms, this is an indictment, not a conviction. This is a little like a judge refusing to throw a case out, but insisting that the case has merit, except it's actually more than that. The IGIC doesn't adjudicate these cases. That's not their job. Their job is to say, hey, this case has merit and it should be investigated. This person isn't making this up. For the IGIC to say that this is credible is about the biggest bombshell you and I are likely to see anytime soon. This is an incredibly experienced and powerful member of the intelligence community saying, yep, this is legit. To add that it's urgent means not only that this needs to be investigated, but that it needs to begin immediately. There's a serious reason why this can't wait, nor can the investigation take 10 years or some ridiculous thing. Remember that Grusch's claims were that there was criminal activity taking place in association with the cover-up. People have been killed. Congress has been denied their constitutional mandate to have oversight over DoD's activities. That's not just illegal, that's literally hijacking the entire government. To say that DOD engaging in this activity without Congress knowing about it is incredibly scandalous. The way the U.S. government works is with a balance of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The legislative branch, Congress, has to have oversight over the activities of the executive branch, the president, the military, the intelligence agencies, law enforcement, etc. Going all the way back to the founding of the U.S., the reason for including legislative oversight over the executive branch is the difference between the balance of powers intended by the founding fathers and the tyranny of a king. The difference is why the Revolutionary War took place. The United States of America was literally founded on this very principle, that this kind of unchecked power was not okay. A war lasting several years was fought over it. And Grusch has come along and alleged things that DOD will never admit to. Things DOD cannot admit to. The number of people who would go to jail is staggering. Some people say, poofed. There's no way so many people could possibly keep a secret this big. Fun fact. There are 1.25 million active top secret clearance holders in the U.S. government. They know things that it's a felony to say out loud. Yes, things can leak from time to time, but you can't possibly fathom the amount of information that's kept behind a veil of secrecy, nor how many people successfully keep those secrets. Having worked for the U.S. DOD for most of my adult life, and having held a top secret clearance for much of that time, I can confirm two things. There's no job the U.S. government can't do twice as badly in 10 times as much time for 100 times the cost. The U.S. government is incredibly incompetent and cumbersome. So much so that it's a wonder anything gets done at all. He didn't write however, but I think this is what he means. However, the government is very good at keeping secrets, especially in the incredibly tight-knit community of special operations. We've already got as much confirmation as we're going to get anytime soon. It's painfully obvious that Grusch is telling the truth. It couldn't possibly be more obvious. There couldn't be a more credible witness. It all fits. Aliens are absolutely real. The U.S. government clearly possesses crashed craft that came to us from extraterrestrial life. They possess the bodies of the pilots of UAPs. They aren't human. I don't know how much or of what kind of evidence you want, but this is about as good as it gets until all this stuff is actually declassified, which will eventually happen. But until it does, this is definitive. To me, at least. Now we're going to examine some of the content of his very well-written communication that underlined his assessment of David Grusch. Before we get started, I want you to know that David Haith, the researcher that gave me a transcript of what the anonymous insider wrote. I mean, he spent his whole career in the DOD. He was never read into any UFO programs, but what I went over was his assessment of the credibility of David Grusch. Anyways, David Haith wrote to me that the Intel guy's Grusch piece is on his public Facebook page. So if you want to see that script that he wrote, you can find it on a Facebook page called Anomalies Are Us. I'm just going to do a little analysis of 3 separate parts from the Intel guy's statement. He wrote, "Imagine what you could do if you could convince an alien civilization to be your ally, like an intergalactic NATO, where if you were attacked, you could call upon your alien ally to fight for you and protect you. So what a given country knows about aliens, down craft, non-human biologics, etc., it makes perfect sense to call that a matter of national security and that it should be classified at the highest levels. It's interesting that he stated that. This is something I've contemplated in the past myself. Would nations try to make contact with these civilizations and persuade them to become allies, or to give them something they want, and in return maybe they could protect them or give them technologies? Of course, this ties into one of David Grusch's biggest concerns, that he couldn't verify 100% whether it happened or not, but he became suspicious of this during his investigation into these programs that have been covered up and kept from proper congressional oversight. And that is the idea that the US government has made a deal with one of these civilizations. That obviously would be very problematic to do such a thing. And if they did it, it would have been like around the time of the Cold War. I can only surmise. But I can understand why the US government and other governments who have allegedly recovered craft and bodies would be very reluctant to give details on what those bodies look like, out of an abundance of caution or even paranoia, simply because they could perceive that if they give information on what these aliens look like, it might somehow help another nation to make contact and develop a relationship with that civilization. That might be a little excessive, and in fact I think that they should release the data on the bodies, or the morphologies, as Grusch has referred to it. They should release that, because that would be like the least detrimental to national security. Like when I said that maybe it could help another nation to make contact or whatever, I said that imaginatively. I don't know how that would help another nation make contact or assist them in getting on the good side of any particular civilization. I hope that if all of this is real, which I think the likelihood is higher than not that it is, when we finally get disclosure, I hope they do reveal the morphologies, what the various species look like. I think that would be extremely fascinating, and it would go a very long way to ascertain the likelihood that abductions are happening. Because if you look at the abduction literature from many disparate sources, the way these creatures are reported to look encompass patterns that are seen over and over again. The most common species that I know of are the grays. And there's like two morphologies with the grays. There's the short grays. Some people believe those shorter grays are actually biological robots. And then there's the taller grays, which may indeed not be biological robots, but maybe some kind of species from another world or from our very planet. But if we did finally get the morphologies, let's say disclosure happened and they declassified the way that these beings look, well, what happens if the beings look like praying? Like, what if one species is reported to be like insectoid-like the classic praying mantis that people report seeing? Another species is gray. Another species perhaps is the Nordics, like the human-looking species. What if another species is the tall whites? And the other species that have been reported, if that were to occur, then we would have a pretty good idea that the abduction phenomenon is absolutely real. And I think that's important. If people are being taken against their will, that's not something that should be covered up Everything has been covered up for so long. If we finally get disclosure, that's a component of the discussion that should not be concealed from public discourse and scientific investigation. That would be absolutely ridiculous. And just to reiterate, because I've said it in previous videos, Grusch has stated that there are different morphologies, but he was not willing to get into it. All right, let's dive into the second portion that I want to analyze. Let me quote that portion, and I quote, "It also makes sense that the intelligence community and DoD would keep this information from the president and from Congress. I could easily see people deciding that it's too dangerous to entrust to civilian politicians who might make it public in order to get elected. Think of it. If you're the president in your first term, and the election is coming up in a couple months, and it's clear you're about to lose to your opponent, you might be tempted to disclose that aliens are real, to cause people to band together to face this new threat. And they need you and your experience to help navigate this, to help them navigate this. Plus, you would be the one who finally did the right thing and ended so many years of deception. And well, you'd get reelected for sure. Or at least that might be the idea that occurs to you. And of course, all that technology represents tons of money, power, influence, etc. So thanks to David Grusch's testimony, we know a lot of things. And for me, it makes perfect sense now why UFOs have been classified for all these years. Perfect sense." Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that the populace probably underestimates, is how big a can of worms it is to disclose this reality. It's so unpredictable how it would impact the various facets of our society. And intelligence agencies do not like unpredictability. That's like their least favorite thing. So you can imagine how unappealing transparency on this issue has been and continues to be for the intelligence agencies and the intelligence community at large. And you know, one of the things Grusch said is that he said he had a pretty good understanding about what presidents have been briefed, to what extent they've been briefed. As I recall, he said something to the effect of, early on, the presidents were more readily briefed, but as time went on, future presidents were not told all aspects of the program. The program being the term, because the actual name of the program is obviously classified, but it's often the UFO crash retrieval and back engineering exploitation program is just usually called the program. So those behind the cover up, for the longest time, and it continues to be that way, except for the people that actually want this to come out. And there are people who want this to come out and people who don't want this to come out. That's very clear. But it is true that when this comes out, you're opening doors to so many different possibilities that cannot be predicted what's going to happen. And I can understand where people in the intelligence community are coming from that just feel like that it's safer to keep this hidden. But that of course is an extremely short-sighted perspective. It's safer in the short term. It's profoundly precarious in the long term. The longer this is covered up, the more damaging it's going to be when the truth finally comes out. And we really shouldn't be playing roulette with the health of the union. That's just crazy. So let's get this underway. Let's stop the shenanigans, stop the disinformation campaigns, the obfuscation, the lies. Let's stop pretending like there's nothing to see here and learn about our universe. And I believe we'll come out on the other side of that better for it.
None of this laid back nonsense. When you come to my channel, you gotta be pumped up. You gotta feel the fire within you. You gotta believe. You gotta live. You gotta traverse.
Sorry about that. There must be an issue with the system. I'll get that looked at pronto. But for now, let's carry on with the analysis of the DoD employees sentiments about David Grusch. There's just one more segment that I want to cover. The ex-DOD employee wrote, and Grusch has come along and alleged things that DOD will never admit to. Things DOD cannot admit to. The number of people who would go to jail is staggering. Of course, self-preservation is one of the strongest instincts a human has. So you can imagine powerful high-level officials that have become intertwined with the secrecy architecture would not want to make themselves vulnerable to any laws on the books or scrutiny from Congress or outrage from taxpayers and so on. So this is part of the motivation that keeps this secrecy persisting to the detriment of all of civilization. Perhaps that should teach us something, I suppose. Either way, I want to add to what the Intel individual said by quoting something that George Knapp stated on December 21st, 2017, shortly after the New York Times article dropped that accelerated this disclosure process we're in to this very day. According to my notes, he said the following on Phenomenon Radio, and I quote, "There are people inside government now who are freaking out about this, who are opposed to the release of the information." He's referencing the New York Times article and the information that has come with it and more information that will inevitably come out. Let's continue with George Knapp's quote. "Not necessarily because they worry about the public going crazy, buying guns, and blowing up all social institutions. That might be a concern. But because they worry about their own culpability, about the lies that they have told, about money that's been stashed into secret programs that should have gone somewhere else, about the taxpayers getting outraged." Knapp goes on to explain. "There are a range of motives for why people don't want this disclosure to happen." I added the word disclosure. He just said, want this to happen. "Some are worried that they're going to go to jail. Some are worried that it's the devil. Some just don't want the public to know, or they've got friends in industry, or they're worried that the Russians and the Chinese might find out what we're up to. There's a range of reasons," end quote. As a civilian, George Knapp is probably plugged into the UFO issue from a governmental level, government and military level, more than anyone. In fact, he's more plugged in than most U.S. government and intelligence officials are. He's been doing this a long time. He has a lot of connections and knows a lot of people. So his perspective on why there's secrecy and why people would be upset with the December 16th, 2017 New York Times article, and by extension what's continued to happen, would be and is very insightful. In the vein of this conversation, I want to share two tweets by journalist Christopher Sharp that I found interesting and insightful. He wrote, "The big elephant in the room in regards to the Arrow has been Kirkpatrick's advisors, whose names the DOD refuses to release. Believe me, there are a lot of legacy keepers panicking and desperate to know what Dave knows." In another tweet he wrote, "A bunch of people, including Kirkpatrick, are frustrated. The fact that no one can dismiss David Grusch's allegations drives them crazy. It keeps them awake at night and gives them nightmares. Because Dave is legit, smart, and knows where the bodies and craft are buried." To end this video, I just want to cover some interesting ground. I know that Bryce Zabel has broached this many times, and I'm sure he puts it more eloquently than I do. I think he's the only person I've heard it worded I've heard word it just this way. He said in the past that there are two things in common that the phenomena, that is the non-human intelligence and governments have. They both want to keep this secret. The phenomena acts and behaves in a clandestine way. It very much reduces its signature. That's why the myriad of private satellites in Earth's atmosphere are not getting recordings of these UAP. That's why cameras, phones, and security cameras are not routinely getting footage of UAP. It could be that the technology itself makes it hard for video capture, maybe because of what it emits or what have you, and it's easier for the eye to pick up versus getting it from video footage. But I tend to believe that there's some serious signature management going on, which is weird because it also allows itself to be seen, and it's this very almost convoluted scenario that seems to be unfolding, which is part of the depth of the mystery. So there is deception being orchestrated by the phenomena in the sense that it's allowing itself to be perceived, recognized, and observed, but it's simultaneously intentionally keeping itself from being documented scientifically. However, world governments are documented it scientifically. Part of that might be because it's allowing world governments to document it scientifically, and part of that might be that world governments such as the United States government have developed methods over time to track and observe UAP, methods that industry and in the public domain have not developed. So let's put that in a nutshell on the truth that UFOs, to a very large extent, want to remain secret. Likewise, let's just talk about the U.S. government for now. The U.S. government wants to keep it secret. The U.S. government doesn't want to reveal the truth about UFOs to the world. They obfuscate. They lie. So in some real sense, the U.S. government has a lot in common with UFO intelligence. They're both motivated to implement deception, obfuscation to the world at large. And that is part of the great mystery that threads throughout this whole issue. And that will be a lot to unravel when they finally declassify it. Like, what is going on? Why was this equation part of the reality we were all dealing with? It's a lot to wrap your head around. It's counterintuitive and it seems false, but I don't think it is false. There's a great quote by scientist Neil deGrasse Tyson. He wrote, "The universe is under no obligation to make sense to you." And I think that as a civilization, we're just going to have to grapple with that truth in a post-disclosure world. It's going to be quite the time. It's going to stimulate our imaginations for sure. And with that, let's wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching. Please do not forget to subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, you can check out my merch shop where I sell t-shirts. You could become a patron. You could become a YouTube member. You could give me a one-time donation. All those potentialities can be accessed in the description box below, or you can just slap a like on this bad boy and I'll appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Booyah. Special thanks to all patrons, YouTube members, those that have bought merch, those that have given me a one-time donation. I couldn't do without you. Thank you so much. See you in the next episode.